This is a story of a remarkable young man.
My grandparents started taking me about the time I was 6 months old. I'll still get people coming up to me and say, man, we used to see you at all these bluegrass shows. Your grandparents would have you there in a stroller and you'd be keeping perfect time.
Michael Cleveland is a fiddler.
Bluegrass is where it is for me, but I have to say, if I hadn't had the classical training at school, I probably would have had a much harder time of trying to learn how to play.
He wows other musicians, including the best in the business.
And that's what he does when he plays. He moves me. It's wicked to see how much music he pulls out of a bow. He's untouchable.
And all of this while dealing with a visual impairment.
I can see some light and I can see some forms or shadows, and that's pretty much the extent of my vision.
But what elevates him into the rare echelon of unique talent is the diversity and range of his skill and technique. His speed with the bow and flawless riffs are not just impressive, but enticing even to those who are not bluegrass aficionados. Just listen for a brief moment. Meet Michael Cleveland.
Welcome to Blind Abilities. I'm Jeff Thompson.
And I'm Pete Lane. Our guest today is Michael Cleveland. Michael is touted as one of the best fiddle players ever. Michael has a ton of awards. In fact, to be honest with you, I've lost track of exactly how many. But the last I checked, Michael had won more than a dozen Fiddle Player of the Year awards, and his band, Flamekeeper, had won at least 7 Bluegrass Band of the Year. Maybe in a little bit, we'll ask Michael to tell us exactly how many of those he's won, if he can even keep track. But in the meantime, let's meet Michael. By the way, Michael, before we get started, I think you just had a birthday a couple of days ago. Happy belated birthday to you.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Jeff and Pete. Thanks for having me on.
You're certainly welcome. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, Michael is also visually impaired, and we will definitely get into that. In fact, Mike, we would love more than anything else to talk about your music, but the name of the podcast is Blind Abilities. So if you don't mind, we'll kick it off with a little discussion of your eyesight and the challenges that you've faced as a result of losing your vision at an early age.
Now, before we get into this, I'm probably the only blind person that don't know the name of their eye condition. So I'll tell you that right up front. But I can see some light and I can see some forms or shadows, and that's pretty much the extent of my vision.
Well, I want to go back to something that Pete said. He said the best fiddle player ever. Was it called fiddle before the 40s?
You know, I'm not sure. I think so. I think that name had been around for a long time, but that's a very good question. I'm not sure when the term fiddle came about.
We'll have to do a fact checker on that one.
Yeah, for sure.
When did the term fiddle originate? 1570s. Is there a difference between a violin and a fiddle? The words fiddle and violin are two names for the same stringed instrument. Fiddle is just an informal way of referring to the violin. In the context of classical music, it's typically called a violin. In a bluegrass band, it's more likely to be called a fiddle.
I was reading some notes. You made a reference that at the blind school, you were asked if you were interested in playing violin, and you said, I don't know about that, but I'm interested in the fiddle.
Right.
Yeah.
The way I got into music, none of my family ever played. None of my family played music. But my grandparents, before I was born, like a few years before, they had gotten into bluegrass music. I think there was only one show happening at the time when they first got into the music. And then they were so into bluegrass that they started a bluegrass show in Henryville, Indiana, where I was born, small town here in southern Indiana. So they started up this bluegrass show, and then a couple more started around. So by the, say, early to mid 80s, there were bluegrass shows going on pretty much every Saturday night. Like the second and fourth Saturday of each month was my grandparents' bluegrass show in Henryville, Indiana. Then the first Saturday of each month would be a show in Madison, Indiana, which is not very far. And then the third Saturday in Scottsburg. So we had it pretty much all around us. And my grandparents, if they weren't working their show, they would go to all the others. And they started taking me about the time I was 6 months old. So I hear. I'll still get people coming up to me and say, man, we used to see you at all these bluegrass shows. And we'd see you, your grandparents would have you there in a stroller and you'd be keeping perfect time. But I grew up around bluegrass. That's pretty much all I heard. And my grandparents had a big record 8-track collection, and I would go over there and listen to bluegrass. And then I, of course, on the weekends, I would always be with them at whatever bluegrass show. I guess the first bluegrass song I was really into, this way before I played or anything, and I can barely remember much about it, but I remember hearing the song Rocky Top, and I really liked it, and I was into that for a while, and then I heard a fiddle player play Orange Blossom Special, and that was another thing entirely. Once I heard that, it was like, I've got to figure out how to do it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, our next act, we have Michael Cleveland.
This tune that I want to play is a little thing called Orange Blossom Special. It makes me feel like I've really been appreciated.
It doesn't get much better than that one, does it?
No, not for a fiddle player.
Yeah.
Well, unless you listen to your latest album, right?
Oh, well, thanks.
So what led you to the blind school? Were your parents advocates for you? Did they want the best for you and all that stuff?
They sure did. Here was the dilemma, though. I lived in Indiana. I lived in southern Indiana. Henryville, Indiana is just across the river from Louisville, Kentucky. And it's about 25 miles from Louisville and about 100 miles from Indianapolis. I was supposed to go to the Indiana School for the Blind. Mom and Dad didn't want to send me that far away. And my dad worked as a truck driver for many years, and he worked for Pepsi. And he had a friend who he worked with named Gary Miller. They both worked in Louisville. And he was really close friends with Gary, and so he made Gary a legal guardian. And that was how I was able to go to the Kentucky School for the Blind in Louisville and be closer to home. So I was a dorm student at first, and then I was a day student later once I moved to Louisville. Yeah, so I ended up going to the Kentucky School for the Blind.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they tried teaching you violin.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I learned a lot there. You know, I stayed and I took classical from the time I first started until maybe 12 or 13 years old. And then I took a break for a few years and then came back around 16 or so and learned some more. Really, you know, I am a bluegrass player. It's what I like. I really love listening to classical and all that, but bluegrass is where it is for me. But I have to say, as far as being able to play and learning how to play, if I hadn't had the classical training at school, you know, and the Suzuki method and all that, I probably would have had a much harder time of trying to learn how to play. So I'm very grateful for that.
Hey, Michael, you are also partially deaf. I think at an early age, you lost, about 80% of your hearing in your left ear?
Yeah.
I heard somebody comment on one of the online documentaries. In fact, there's a really excellent full-length documentary about you and your life.
And that's what he does when he plays. He moves me. It's wicked to see how much music he pulls out of a bow. He's untouchable.
Somebody commented that, and it's really clear when we listen to your music, that you play aggressively. You play with intensity and power. Do you think some of that might be because you're limited hearing in that left ear, which is pressed right up against the body of the fiddle? Do you think that might be why you play a little bit louder or you attack it a little bit more?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, it's hard to know.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be hard to say without having something to compare it to, it's always kind of been that way. But I've always loved people who play that way. There are a lot of great musicians out there who play really clean and they play every single note. You can hear every little thing, but I always like the musicians who could, for lack of a better word, mash on it. I always like people who play aggressively, with feeling, I guess you could say, rather than somebody who's concentrating on every little note. Just
the
feeling
mechanics.
Kind of
So what was it like to go back to your school and, they're probably working on the mechanics and every single note, the Suzuki method and everything. And then you come in playing bluegrass after you made it. What was their response?
I guess I did come back there and play a couple times. I don't know. When I was first starting to learn how to play, they didn't know too much about bluegrass. And I think my teacher at the time was pretty concerned that it would hurt my playing, so she didn't really want me playing bluegrass. I think she had heard a bad example of it somewhere. Yeah, of course, as you do, you turn on the TV or something and you hear some band on there and you think that is the style of music. But bluegrass, along with rock and roll and country and everything, there's so many different styles within the genre. To listen to one thing and say that's it.
True.
That's not really fair because there's a big world out there. They had heard bluegrass or heard something about it and they didn't necessarily want me playing it. So I would learn classical during the week and then play bluegrass at home. I mean, it took me a while to even get started. I think it was like 2.5 years or so before I could even get going at all. They had a book that had simple versions of bluegrass fiddle tunes in there in the school music room. And the teacher taught me a simple version of Boil the Cabbage Down and Oh Joe Clark, which are two of the most basic bluegrass fiddle tunes to start out with learning. I learned those and took my fiddle to one of the local shows, and I ran into my friend Brian Allen, who did go to the Indiana School for the Blind, who's also visually impaired and is in the documentary.
Had I listened to a lot of people, I would never have worked on engines, and I'd have sat behind a desk somewhere.
Right. He's a guitar picker, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, phenomenal.
Really
We're actually working on an album for him here at the house.
Cool.
He and I have known each other for years, and it's weird. We live probably 15, 20 miles apart, but he did go to the Indiana School for the Blind, and I went to Kentucky. A lot of people think we went to school together because we play so much around here. To get back to what you were asking, I think it took a long time for the teachers at school to kind of realize, and really, I mean, for me to realize, this might actually work out because, there's so many musicians. I mean, you just go to Nashville and you go to Broadway or you go wherever, How many musicians you think are in Nashville and they're all trying to do the same thing? It's like at that point, it goes beyond how good you are or how talented you are. It's luck at that point. It's being at the right place, at the right time. But still, it's a crapshoot. You never know. You could practice and get as good as you could be, but still, if it's not the right place or time or somebody doesn't hear you, it really doesn't matter.
Reminds me of that song, Nashville Cats.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's 16,851 pickers in Nashville.
Yeah.
Guitar Town.
Yeah, probably more now, more every day.
But you mentioned work and practice. That's the
Yeah.
key ingredient, because I think all the talent in the world won't get it for you, and it's not going to come quick.
Well, work, practice, and fun. I have to hand it to my parents. I never was really pushed in this music. My parents did expect me to, if I committed to do something, I was going to do it, and all that kind of thing. But they were never really the type of people to be on me constantly about practicing or, I see so many kids today. And I mean, the kids who play now, they're so much better and so much further advanced than what I was. In all reality, they should be, because now you got YouTube and now you can download an app that slows everything down. You can hear every note, whereas the way I learned it, like if you were going to slow something down, you might be able to put something on a record player and do the thing where you change the speed of the, slow the needle down or what. I never did that, but I've heard people talk
It would
about
change
it.
your key for starters.
It would. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It changed the pitch drastically. Now you can slow stuff down and you don't even change the pitch.
Yeah. It'd come across like Rocky Top, Tennessee.
Yep. It would be like one of those library talking book players.
There you go.
You speed down. I think a lot of the kids today, I see the parents, and I know whenever somebody is talented, you want to encourage that. But then, you also see, or I see a lot of times, a lot of kids that just don't get to be kids anymore because all of a sudden they can play and their parents decide that they need to be up on stage immediately with everybody, and they just don't have a childhood. And I'm very grateful that my parents encouraged me, but yet I never doubted that at any time, if I got really interested in something else, I could go do that.
Did you have a regular childhood, do you think?
Yeah, I think I did have a regular childhood because, my parents did encourage me. And I will say, my grandparents and my parents, between them, if there was something going on the weekends or whatever that I could do, they made sure that I got there to do it.
What kind of thing might that be, just for an example?
A bunch of local stuff until I was probably 9 or 10. And then about that time, we started going to fiddle contests. My grandparents would travel to festivals or fiddle contests, whatever, and they would have somebody take over their show that they were running it here in Henryville, Bluegrass show, and we would go to a contest or whatever. And that was really good for me because once you start getting out and you play with people out of your own backyard, then you kind of see where you are. You kind of see where you stand and see just how many great musicians there really are. And little kids who can play. At these contests, they come from everywhere. Kids from Tennessee or Kentucky or wherever are playing these contests and winning. And you've never heard of them before. So that was really good. So it didn't really start getting to where I would go out of town a lot until maybe around the time I was 12, 13 or whatever. But the one thing that they did that I'm super grateful for, because I had a lot of friends who were wanting to get into music, and their parents pretty much at one point homeschooled them and they played music. I thought I wanted to do that so bad. I thought, man, that would be so cool if I could just do a homeschool thing and play music whenever I wanted. But I'm so grateful now that my parents both said, nope, you're going to finish school. I'm so glad that they did because I wasn't burned out on it.
Yeah, right. You hear a lot of young kids who are athletes talk the same way. If they're pushed into it and they're exposed to it and they're pushed and pushed and pushed, they do get burned out and then they want to do other things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that happening with you.
It's just too much too soon,
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
Like that story you're talking about getting up on stage where you got to go to Nashville and then you're in the backstage there with Bill Monroe and the guys playing. I thought that was really cool.
You mean the Opry?
The Opry, I think it was.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I had met Bill Monroe before, but yeah, when I was 13, Alison Krauss invited me to be a guest of hers on the Opry. And that was, it was so surreal. Like the Opry, whenever you play a spot on the Grand Ole Opry, it's usually like 2 or 3 songs. 3 songs now, maybe at the most. Mainly if you go out there, if you play an Opry spot, you're going to play 1, maybe 2 songs. So it is a blur. You know, it's this huge adrenaline rush. Here you are, you know, you're playing the most famous, you know, the biggest stage in country music where everybody aspires to be. And you go out there and you play one song and it's over like in 5 minutes. But you got all this leading up to it. You know, you're hanging out backstage and you're practicing and you're, you know, walking around seeing everybody. And I've done it quite a few times now, but that first time it was just like surreal, you know, and everybody was back there. Bill Monroe and of course Alison Krauss and Union Station, you know, the whole band was just jamming back in the dressing room, you know. And
well, especially when you're 13 years old to boot.
Oh yeah.
And jamming with Doc Watson.
Just a little less speed than that, see if I can get these runs. I've got to sort of take my handicap kind of lightly. I don't know if you've had yours all your life or not, but I never could see.
I don't think of it too much. I mean, you know, there's some things I can't do, but I'm going to make do with what I can do.
You'll make do with what you have, son. Yes, you can. You've got a God-given talent that nobody can rob you from.
So do you.
Well, I had to work a lot harder for mine than you have for some reason.
What kind of equipment are you using today for technology to access reading material when you're on tour and stuff? What's it like as someone who is blind to have access? And I know you don't want to learn every stage. You probably just get me to the microphone and I'll go. But what's it like today?
Oh, man. For a visually impaired person, technology today is way beyond what it used to be. To be honest, I probably don't use half of it, but I love my iPhone. I think the iPhone and Apple, man, I remember getting my first iPod Touch and then an iPhone. It was around 2010, something like that. I would use a computer and I was using Windows Eyes.
Oh, yeah.
And it did good till it crashed, and then you'd have to reboot.
Right.
Start over. But I could read email that way. But if I was on the road or whatever, I didn't have a way to check email or text or anything else. I had an old cell phone, just regular dial cell phone that I used. And then my dad, I think it was around Christmas one year. We always do this thing. What do you want for Christmas? I don't know. You know, we're terrible about it. We just go back and forth. We never can figure out what to get each other. I was looking and I found this iPod for the blind thing, this website that was advertised. And it was some kind of iPod that was pretty small, but you could load stuff on it and play it. And I said something to Dad about it. It's like, well, that might be pretty cool, you know? And he went over to the Apple store. He told me this later. They're like, well, you know, I don't know why you would get that since, you know, all the Apple products essentially do the same thing. You turn voiceover on and you can have an iPod with, you know, 32 gigs or way more than, you know, whatever this was, 5 gigs or whatever. So he got me this iPod Touch and then I got an iPhone and it just, I don't use a computer anymore, hardly. Well, I take that back. I use a computer now because when I'm not on the road playing, I play on tracks for people. People send me songs to play overdub fiddle or mandolin or something like that on. To just tell you how great the iPhone is, and y'all probably know all of this, but I have figured out a way to do tracks on the iPhone. And I guess you all messed around with GarageBand, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
So I figured out a way. It's not the GarageBand app because you can't make a WAV file on the iPhone using GarageBand that I know of, unless that's changed. But I found this other app that I was able to use, and I had the iPhone, and I bought an audio interface to record, and then I had a condenser mic, so you hook the mic into the interface, get a camera adapter for the iPhone, and hook the iPhone up to the interface. And you can record that way. It's hard to punch and fix or whatever, but you can get it done. So I was doing tracks that way. I would post in a lot of these groups, fiddle tracks or whatever, and this guy hired me for a session a few years ago. So, yeah, I got a country track I can use some fiddle on. And I played on it for him. And we got talking, and it turned out he was visually impaired also. His name is Matt Carson. He was saying, well, what are you using to record? And I said, well, I just got my phone and this app and this audio interface and this microphone. And he said, well, have you ever used Pro Tools? I said, no. Obviously, I know what it is. I've been in a ton of studios. And he said, well, I'm visually impaired, and I use Pro Tools all the time. I could tell you what to get. I can teach you how to use it. You'll be off and running in no time. So during the pandemic, when everything shut down, I kept in touch with Matt, and we've worked on a lot of stuff together. And check him out. His name online is Matt Carson. Matt Carson Music, and he'd be another one that'd be good to have on your show because, man, he's done a lot. He teaches assistive technologies. Somebody needs to learn how to use QuickBooks or computer software, learn how to use JAWS or something. They would send somebody like Matt.
Oh, wow.
But he's got a kind of a country career as Matt Carson. And he's got social media and a lot of recordings online. And there's a lot to that guy. You should check him out.
Definitely will do. Thanks for the tip.
He got me going on Pro Tools, and that's been huge.
Hey, I bet that stepped up your game big time from the phone.
Oh, God. Yeah.
I'm really excited to hear about Matt and Pro Tools because that's something that's always been kind of a roadblock in the way of it. A lot of barricades and brick walls with accessibility, but he's living proof that he's using it. And so we'll make sure we'll get his links.
Oh, he's a wizard. Like, he knows so much more about that. I just haven't had time to sit down, and I need to go back up there and do another 3 or 4 days. He can edit, mix, tune, do everything you would want to do as a recording engineer, which I had checked into, and I hadn't heard about a lot of visually impaired people being able to record. The only thing I did hear, I talked to a guy about using Sonar. And the only problem with Sonar was that version of Cakewalk that you got to use, you have to have like Windows 7 or something to use it. And so I'm thinking, man, I don't know if I want to not ever update my operating system, And so I was thinking about doing that, and you'd have to send it to somebody to set it up and get trained on that. And then I ran into Matt, and he was talking about Pro Tools, and man, it's just perfect. I mean, it's limitless what you could do.
Yeah, Pro Tools is synonymous with the recording industry, especially musicians and everything.
That's the thing. It's like if you learn how to use that, that is the standard for everybody. And that's what Matt said. Even if he's not on his computer, he could pull up somebody's Pro Tools, hit Command F5, turn voiceover on, and at least be able to work on it.
You mentioned QuickBooks. You're the band manager. Your band, by the way, for everybody, is called Flamekeeper. You are obviously one of the musicians, but you are also the band manager. And I assume that involves keeping books and doing some sort of financial bookkeeping.
Yeah.
So what do you use for that?
Now, I have to tell you, a lot of the band management is done by my dad, John Cleveland. He uses QuickBooks, and I have yet to learn QuickBooks, but that's one of the next things on the list.
Michael, you mentioned something about the recording. You said the condenser microphone. I'm just curious because I know the sound of the violin is sharp, and so many different microphones pick up different ways, and they're good for a deep voice or if you have a higher voice. What kind of microphone are you using, and how are you using it when you record?
Well, there's nothing too complicated, but I mean, there's a bunch of mics that sound good. The one that I use, I think I paid about $350 for, used on eBay. I don't think they make it anymore. And the only reason I got the one I did is because I was in the studio working on one of my albums and the engineer was using it. And I thought, well, sounds pretty good. But I've used a bunch of different microphones. I think the microphone has a lot to do with it tonally, but also where it's placed. Like you said, I probably mic over on the right side of the instrument just because it seems to be a little mellower. But yeah, there's a lot of good microphones out there, and anything from a couple $100 to thousands of dollars, depending on what kind of money you want to spend and how deep you want to get into it.
I got a personal question for you. All the awards that, Fiddler of the Year, all these awards, your album, big awards. From the first time you won the big award to now with over a dozen, is it still the same feeling?
Man, yeah. I mean, it's anytime you're nominated by your peers, it's a big deal. I definitely don't take it lightly. And I'll also say there's a ton of fiddle players, well, musicians in general out there in bluegrass or whatever that don't get nominated for these awards. So for everybody who wins, there's always the players out there that you don't hear about that are equally as good or maybe even better. So to be nominated in the top 5 or to win or whatever, I'm always grateful for that.
I have a kind of off-topic question. Have you ever heard of Johnny Hyland?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, man. I love his playing.
Yeah. We interviewed him a couple of years ago, and yeah, he's incredible. Chicken picking is his claim to fame. Man. Yeah, as fast as lightning. Kind of like you, but on the guitar.
I'd love to meet him. And I actually I forget where we were flying. We ran into one of his band members, and they were saying, man, we'd love to get the two of you together. I'd love to play some music with him one of these days.
That'd be a great connection for sure. Well, we'll hook you up. What do you think?
He does a YouTube Sunday thing. He used to be on there and take people's requests.
There you go.
He does online tutoring too, one-on-one tutoring. You do that, don't you?
I used to do some of that. The problem with me and doing that over here is my internet connection is so weird. It kind of makes it hard for me to do a lot. I got pretty busy doing it, but my connection was so spotty and very inconsistent. Yeah. If I ever get somewhere where I've got some good internet service, I'd like to get back into it. I really did enjoy it.
Can you tell me about Tall Fiddler, how you put that together? Because there's a lot of musicians on there, and it won quite a big award.
Yeah, well, The way I kind of put an album together, it's you compile a bunch of songs. It's kind of a frame of mind, like for me, I get into the headspace of, oh yeah, I'm recording, I'm playing on music, I'm playing on the road, playing shows, and I kind of get all into that and don't really focus on anything else. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, it's time to record. I mean, I think the way it started, of course, the members of my band and I, we had been playing a few of the songs as a band.
I woke up in a hotel, didn't know what to do. Turned the TV on and wrote a letter to you. The news was talking about a dragnet upon the interstate. Seems they were looking for a Cadillac with Tennessee plates. Since I left California, baby, things have gotten worse. The land of opportunity for me is just a curse. Tell the judge in Bakersfield my trial will have to wait. Down here they're looking for a Cadillac with Tennessee plates. It was somewhere in Nevada, it was cold outside. She was shivering in the dark, so
Then I heard the Tall Fiddler. I'm a big Tommy Emmanuel fan.
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of been listening to him for quite a while, and I got this album of his, Live at the Ryman, and the first song on it was this Tall Fiddler, which I'd never heard. So I found out more about that, and then with the help of our producer, we were able to get in touch with Tommy, and he was really into playing on it. I had met Tommy a couple times before, but I don't think we'd ever played any music before he came into the studio that day. But yeah, all the artists, I think that album opened a lot of doors for me with the Tall Fiddler album and the documentary produced by John Presley.
Well, it's just so smooth. You can play anything, slow, fast. If you're not patting your feet when Michael Cleveland's on, you better check your heart because, by gosh, he's the real deal.
I was able to record and play with some of my peers that I've worked with previously, like Del McCurry and his sons, Ronnie and Rob, and Traveling McCurrys, and Sam Bush, and people like that. And then I got to collaborate with people like Tommy Emmanuel that I hadn't worked with
Baylaflex.
before, and Baylaflex, which I met Bayla during the filming of the documentary. That whole thing, I remember the producer of the film, when we were going to get together and do all this filming, he said, it'd be great if you could learn some of these songs that, say, Bayla has recorded and Del McCurry and some of these people, and play their songs. So I think somebody reached out to Bayla and he sent a couple tunes. Yeah, we could maybe do this. And we showed up for the filming and everybody was jamming and we were playing through all this stuff. And it was pretty loose, it was just a jam session. We got done and we hadn't played these tunes that Bayla had sent. And I did learn them. so I was like, hey, man, let's play one of these tunes.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, yeah, you learned that? I said, yeah, sure. Well, that's really good. You like to learn tunes? I said, yeah, why not? And he seemed surprised that I would have learned it. And I said, well, yeah. I said, well, I like to write some complicated stuff. I said, well, I'd give it a shot anytime. Holler at me. And then that's what resulted in all the work that I've been able to do with him in the last couple of years. So between the documentary and the album, I've been able to work with a lot of people that I don't think I would have been able to.
So Tommy wrote that song for his album.
Yeah. He wrote it about a fiddle player named Byron Berlin, who recently passed away. He lived in Guthrie, Oklahoma. And as a matter of fact, we're going to play his Bluegrass Festival here in about a couple weeks in Guthrie, Oklahoma.
Nice.
Yeah, so the story goes that Tommy was hired to play Byron's festival, and after the show, they got in a big jam session and played about all night. And after the jam, Tommy was inspired to write Tall Fiddler. So the song's about Byron Berlin.
Yeah, you talked about playing in Oklahoma. I went on your website and you can find that. You're touring in the 2023 all around, a lot of stuff over on the East Coast.
Yep, up northeast, Maine, up there.
And I'll be doing some other shows, a bunch of shows with Baylaflex in December. We're going on a big run, I think, from around the beginning of the month till around the 18th or 19th, something like that.
Tell us how our listeners can get in touch with you, Mike.
Yeah, if you want to find out more about me or the band, go to michaelclevelandfiddle.com. And if you want to visit us on social media, definitely do that because we stay on Facebook and Instagram and we post on there quite a bit,
Great.
do live videos and everything else. But all of that, Facebook and Instagram, all that stuff can be found at Michael Cleveland Fiddle.
Pete mentioned to me that he heard something on YouTube or somewhere that you might have a new song coming out.
Yeah, well, we got a new album that we just finished up. We're hoping to have a single released sometime the end of next month. Then another single, maybe the first of the year. And then the album is going to come out March.
Breaking news right here on Blind Abilities.
Yeah.
You're prolific. We used that word earlier, but you are constantly pumping out new music. Your band, Flamekeeper, is keeping up with you as best they can. They are really tight. You are all really tight. It's really impressive to hear.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we have been speaking with Michael Cleveland. I started with the opener, Michael, about trying to guess how many Fiddler of the Year awards. Do you know how many International Bluegrass Music Association Fiddler of the Years you got?
I think you had
I
it.
think it was 12.
Plus the Grammy.
You had it right.
Plus the Grammy, sure. And Flamekeeper's racking up a few awards as well. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Michael. We really appreciate you coming on. I know you got a busy tour schedule and everything else that's going on, but thanks a million for joining us.
Well, thanks, Pete and Jeff, for having me. I really appreciate it.
It was nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
And my mom says thank you. She's passed on, but she was a huge Bill Monroe fan. And every time something came on Bluegrass, she put a bounce in her step while she's in the kitchen. You could just tell.
Cool.
So keeping this music alive, I love it.
Well, if you're not bouncing when you're listening to Michael, then your heart stopped.
Well, thanks so much.
All right.
Thanks.
Yeah, man. Same to you all.
We are here today to honor Charlestown resident Michael Cleveland.
He's got roots in Charlestown, Indiana, and will soon have a Grammy Award on his shelf. But he does have a proclamation that proves Wednesday, February 5th is Michael Cleveland Day in Charlestown. Cleveland's album Tall Fiddler won a Grammy Award for Best Bluegrass Album. He says he hoped he had a shot, but hearing his name called was a complete surprise.
It's like it didn't even register. My girlfriend was with me and she's like, "Babe, you won. Come on, let's go."
A surprise to Cleveland, but no one else. Mayor Treva Hodges presented the proclamation.
Being a new mayor and wanting to make sure that we're celebrating all of the good things that happen in town, I said, well, this should definitely be my first mayoral proclamation.
Cleveland is a member of the National Fiddler Hall of Fame. He's won Fiddle Player of the Year 11 times at the International Bluegrass Music Association, and he's performed all over, including world-famous venues like the Grand Ole Opry. But this Grammy Award hit differently.
I was so flustered when I got up there, I was thanking people that weren't even on the album.
That's great. That's great.
And that's the truth.
Alex Durham, WLKY News.
Jeff and I would like to thank Michael Cleveland for joining us today in the Blind Abilities studio. To find out more about Michael, his music, and his tour dates, check out his website at www.michaelclevelandfiddle.com. He and his band, Flamekeeper, are also on Facebook and Instagram at Michael Cleveland Fiddle. And of course, for more podcasts with a blindness perspective, check us out on our website at www.blindabilities.com. Jeff and I want to thank you all for joining us today. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.
When we share
what we see through
each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap
between the limited expectations and the realities
of blind abilities.